My sister's Instagram flaunted a gold-plated invite on our parents' mantle. Yet my mailbox remained empty. Mom sent a 3-minute voicemail explaining that my husband, the carpenter, would ruin her party's aesthetic for a visiting VIP. She told us to stay home and save money. I laughed. She has no clue that VIP rents from my husband, or that I have $10 million in the bank ready to teach her a lesson this New Year's. My name is Harper Sterling, and standing behind the floor-to-ceiling glass of my living room, I felt less like a daughter and more like a ghost haunting her own life. The rain of Seattle was a gray curtain against the glass, blurring the lights of the city below. A city that my husband effectively owned pieces of, though my family would never believe it. I pressed the phone against my ear, listening to the voicemail for the 4th time. The timestamp said it had been left 3 hours ago. The tone of voice said it had been rehearsed for 3 days. It was my mother, Beatrice. Her voice was sugary, the kind of sweetness that coats the back of your throat right before you choke. "Harper. Darling," she crooned, the digital compression unable to hide the insincerity dripping from every syllable. "I am just devastated, truly devastated. I realized only this morning that your invitation must have been lost in the mail. Can you imagine? The postal service is simply dreadful these days, but, and I hate to say this, perhaps it is for the best." I took a sip of my Pinot Noir, the liquid dark and rich on my tongue. I waited for the turn. There was always a turn. "You see, sweetie, Savannah's boyfriend has invited a very senior partner from his firm to our Christmas Eve dinner, a VIP. It is going to be a very high-end, sophisticated evening. We need to maintain a certain aesthetic, and well, we both know how Caleb is. He is a dear, really, but we cannot have him showing up in those work boots and flannel shirts with dirt under his fingernails. It would just make everyone uncomfortable. Especially him, you understand. Do you not? It is probably better if you two stay in Seattle this year. Save your money. I know things must be tight for a carpenter. We will send a card. Love you." The line went dead. I lowered the phone, looking out at the panoramic view of Elliott Bay. The apartment was silent. Save for the soft hum of the climate control system, it was a 500-square-meter penthouse, a sanctuary of marble and minimalist design that cost more than my parents' entire estate in Virginia. Yet to Beatrice, I was still the charity case. I was still the disappointment who married manual labor. I walked over to the fireplace, resting my hand on the cool stone mantel. It was almost funny. She was worried about Caleb ruining the aesthetic for a VIP. She had no idea that the senior partner she was terrified of offending had just signed a lease for the top 3 floors of the Obsidian Tower, a building that Caleb had acquired 6 months ago. If Caleb walked into that dinner, the VIP would probably stand up and offer him the head of the table, but I could not tell her that. Not yet. The rejection stung, but it was an old, dull ache, like a fracture that never healed quite right. Growing up, the dynamic had been set in stone before I could even read. I was the background noise. My sister Savannah was the melody. While I was in my room teaching myself coding languages and dismantling hard drives, Savannah was being shuttled to beauty pageants, etiquette classes, and social mixers. My parents invested in her like a high-risk stock, pouring every ounce of their limited liquidity into her appearance and her social circle. Convinced she would marry into money and lift the family name out of the upper-middle-class stagnation they despised. I was the practical one, the boring one, the one they expected to work a desk job and stay out of the way. When I started Aegis Ghost, my cybersecurity firm, I did it under a pseudonym, terrified of failure. By the time it became a global standard for data protection, I had grown so used to the shadows that I stayed there. I sold the majority shares but kept operational control and a royalty structure that printed money faster than I could spend it. My parents knew I worked in computers. To them, that meant I fixed printers or reset passwords for a living. I set my wine glass down and walked toward the heavy oak door that led to the garage elevator. I needed to see reality. I needed to see the man they were so ashamed of. The garage was more of a workshop than a place to park cars. Though Caleb's vintage truck sat in the corner, The air smelled of sawdust, cedar, and tung oil, a scent that grounded me instantly. Caleb was bent over a workbench, an array of chisels laid out with surgical precision. He was working on the leg of a chair, his movements rhythmic and gentle. He wore a canvas apron over a t-shirt that had seen better days, and yes, there was sawdust in his hair. He stopped sanding as I approached, sensing my presence. He turned, pulling the safety goggles from his eyes. His face was rugged, lined from years of working outdoors before he moved into the boardroom, but his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and filled with a warmth that my family had never directed at me. "Hey," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You have that look, the one that means you just got off the phone with Virginia." I leaned against the workbench, careful not to touch the wet varnish on a side piece. Mom called. "We are not invited to Christmas." Caleb raised an eyebrow, picking up a rag to wipe his hands. "Let me guess. She is worried I will eat with my hands. Or did she think my truck would leak oil on her driveway? Both." "Probably," I said, forcing a dry laugh. "And she has a VIP guest, a partner from Savannah's boyfriend's firm. She thinks you will ruin the aesthetic. She told us to stay home and save our money." Caleb snorted, a genuine, amused sound. He looked down at his hands, calloused and strong. Hands that had built furniture, then houses, then skyscrapers. Hands that signed checks with more zeros than my father could count. "Save our money," he repeated, shaking his head. "That is thoughtful of her. I was just thinking we were running low on funds to buy sandpaper." Just then, my phone vibrated against the marble countertop where I had left it, but my smartwatch buzzed on my wrist. I glanced down. It was a notification from my private banking app. A quarterly royalty payment from the Aegis Ghost licensing deal had just cleared. $2,150,000. I stared at the number on the tiny screen. It was just digits. It was abstract. To my mother, money was a weapon, a shield, a personality trait. To us, it was just a score in a game we had already beaten. I looked back at Caleb. I felt a sudden surge of pity for them, not anger. Just a deep, hollow pity. They were playing a game of status on a checkerboard, while we were playing three-dimensional chess in a different room entirely. "We are not going," I said firmly. Caleb tossed the rag onto the bench. "I am heartbroken. Truly. I had my best flannel shirt picked out." I walked over and wrapped my arms around his waist, burying my face in his chest. He smelled of wood and rain. "Let's go to Switzerland," I murmured. "We can rent that chalet in Zermatt, the one with the private chef. We can spend Christmas skiing and drinking hot chocolate and not being told we are disappointments." Caleb kissed the top of my head. "Zermatt sounds perfect. I will have the pilot ready the jet." So we went. We spent the holidays surrounded by snow-capped peaks and silence, far away from the passive-aggressive comments and the staged perfection of my parents' house. I posted nothing on social media. I let them think we were sitting in our small Seattle apartment, counting pennies, eating leftovers. But peace, I learned long ago, is just the intermission between acts in a family drama. 2 weeks after we returned, the bubble burst. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and drizzling. I was in my home office, reviewing code for a new encryption patch, when my personal cell phone rang. The screen flashed Dad, my father, Richard, never called. He believed the phone was a tool for summoning subordinates, and in his mind, I was a subordinate who lived too far away to be useful. If he was calling, something was wrong. I answered on the third ring, putting on my best dutiful daughter voice. "Hello, Dad Harper." His voice was breathless, panicked. It lacked the usual booming baritone of authority he liked to project. There was a tremor in it that made my spine stiffen. "Harper, are you there? Can you hear me?" "I am here. Dad, is everything okay? Is Mom okay?" Yes, your mother is fine," he said, though he sounded like he was pacing. "Listen, we have a situation, a wonderful situation. Really, but urgent. Very urgent." I waited. He took a jagged breath. "Savannah is getting engaged." I blinked. "Oh, That is great news. To whom Timothy? The tech entrepreneur she has been seeing. You know, the one with the vision? He proposed last night. It is going to be the wedding of the century. Harper. He is a genius. A literal genius. He is taking his company public soon. I rolled my eyes, grateful he could not see me. I had looked up Timothy's company, Tech Future, weeks ago. It was a lot of buzzwords and stock photos. But I hadn't dug deep. I didn't care enough. That is nice, Dad, I said. So why the panic? Well, here's the thing, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Timothy wants to hold the engagement party immediately, next weekend. He wants to strike while the iron is hot, invite investors, make a splash. He has his eye on the Ellington estate. The Ellington estate was the most expensive venue in Virginia. That sounds expensive. I noted. It is an investment, Dad snapped, his old defensiveness flaring up. It is about image, Harper, something you might not understand. But here is the snag. Timothy's assets are currently tied up in the liquidity pool for his IPO. He cannot touch them for 30 days without signaling weakness to the market. He needs us to cover the deposit and the initial vendor costs, just until his funds unlock. I leaned back in my chair, spinning a pen between my fingers. And how much is the deposit? $50,000, he said quickly, plus catering and decor. We need about $75,000 cash. By tomorrow, I stayed silent. I knew exactly what was happening. My parents were house poor. They lived in a mansion they could barely heat, drove leased cars, and carried credit card debt that would make a banker weep. They did not have $75,000, Dad continued, his voice taking on a wheedling, desperate tone. We are a little illiquid right now. Harper, just bad timing with the market and some renovations. We were wondering, well, we need you to come home. Come home, I asked, to bring a check. No, God. No, he laughed nervously. We would not ask you for that kind of money. We know you do not have it, but we need help with the logistics. We cannot afford a planner if we are putting down the deposit. We need someone to coordinate the vendors, manage the setup, do the heavy lifting. Mom is too stressed. Savannah is the bride-to-be. She cannot be working. So you want me to come to be the unpaid wedding planner? And he paused. We were thinking, maybe Caleb has some savings, you know, for a rainy day. If he could loan us just a small amount, maybe 5 or 10,000, we would pay him back with interest once Timothy's money comes through. It would be a good opportunity for him to earn some gratitude from the family. I closed my eyes. The audacity was breathtaking. They wanted me to come home to be a servant, and they wanted my husband, the man they banned from Christmas, to empty his non-existent carpenter savings to fund a party for the sister who had never worked a day in her life. It was insulting. It was degrading. It was the perfect opportunity. I looked at the monitor where my bank balance sat in the corner of the screen, a quiet, 8-figure testament to my reality. If I said no, they would just hate me from a distance. If I sent money, they would take it and still look down on me. But if I went there and let them dig their own grave while I watched, I could see the investigation reports I could run on Timothy. I could see the look on their faces when the house of cards fell. Harper, Dad asked, his voice cracking. Are you there? I am here, Dad, I said, my voice smooth and compliant. I opened my eyes and stared at the gray Seattle sky. Tell Mom not to worry. Caleb and I will drive down. We will be there in 2 days. You will. Relief washed over his voice. Oh, good girl. Good girl. And the money, we will scrape together what we can. I lied. I hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, the silence of the penthouse feeling different now. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a war room. I walked out to the garage again. Caleb was applying a second coat of varnish. He looked up, seeing the shift in my posture. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp purpose. Pack your bags, I said. He stood up, wiping his hands. Switzerland again. I said, Virginia, Savannah is getting engaged to the fraudster. They want us to come help set up the party. They want me to be the maid. And they want you to loan them your life savings. Caleb frowned, confused. And we are going. Why would we do that? I walked over to him, picking up a chisel from the bench. I ran my thumb along the flat of the blade. Because, Caleb, I am tired of being the ghost in their story. If they want a show, we are going to give them one, but we are not going as the rich relatives to save the day. I looked him in the eye. We are going to play the role they want to see. We are going to be the poor, desperate relations. We are going to let them treat us like dirt. And then, when the check comes due, I am going to buy the restaurant. Caleb studied my face for a long moment. He saw the calculation in my eyes. Slowly, a smile spread across his face. Not a nice smile, but a wolfish one. I guess I should pack the old truck then, he said. Yes, I replied. It is time to go home. The gravel of the driveway crunched loudly beneath the tires of Caleb's 1998 Ford pickup. A sound that seemed to violate the aggressive silence of the neighborhood. We had left the luxury SUV at the airport hangar and chosen this vehicle specifically for the performance. It smelled of old pine resin and gasoline, a scent I usually found comforting. But here, parked amidst the manicured boxwood hedges and the looming brick facade of my parents' estate, it felt like a declaration of war. The house itself was a monument to desperation disguised as opulence. From the street, it looked impressive. A colonial revival beast with white pillars that screamed old Virginia money. But as we pulled closer, the cracks in the facade became visible to my trained eye. The landscaping was done, but the mulch was thin, the cheap kind you buy in bulk at a hardware store, rather than the organic cedar blend they used to insist upon. The shutters on the second floor were slightly faded, the paint peeling just enough to suggest that maintenance had been deferred for at least 2 years. It was still adorned with the corpse of Christmas. Wreaths hung from every window, dry and brown at the edges, and plastic icicle lights dangled precariously from the gutters. It was mid-January. Keeping the decorations up this long was not festive. It was a sign that they could not afford the service to take them down and were too proud to do it themselves. Caleb killed the engine. It sputtered and died with a heavy shudder. He looked over at me, his hand resting on the gear stick. Showtime, he said quietly. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my sweater. It was a generic gray knit I had bought at a discount store 2 days ago specifically for this trip. No cashmere. No silk. Just scratchy synthetic blend that would make my mother wince. Let's go be the disappointments they need us to be, I replied. We stepped out into the chill air. I didn't reach for my bags. I waited for Caleb to grab the duffels from the truck bed, playing the part of the wife who expects her husband to do the manual labor because that is all he is good for. He hoisted our worn canvas bags over his shoulder, his biceps straining against his flannel shirt. The front door opened before we even reached the steps. My mother, Beatrice, stood there. She was wearing a silk blouse that I recognized from her catalog 3 years ago, paired with stiff trousers. Her hair was sprayed into a helmet of blonde perfection, but the lighting in the foyer was unforgiving. I could see the new lines around her mouth, the tightness in her jaw that came from clenching her teeth at night worrying about creditors. She did not step out to greet us. She stood in the doorway like a sentry guarding a fortress that had already been sacked. Harper, she said. The word was flat, devoid of warmth. Hi, Mom, I said, stopping on the bottom step. Her eyes performed a slow, clinical scan of my body. She started at my scuffed boots, moved up the ill-fitting jeans, paused at the cheap gray sweater, and finally landed on my face. She did not look happy to see me. She looked vindicated. My appearance confirmed every story she told her friends about poor Harper and her unfortunate life choices. She shook her head, a micro-movement so slight only a daughter would catch it. There was no hug, no outstretched arms. She simply stepped aside to let us in. I see you dressed for comfort, she said, the word dripping with disdain. It was a long drive, I murmured, stepping into the foyer. The heat inside was turned down low. I could feel the chill instantly, saving on the heating bill. I noted mentally. The house smelled of cinnamon broom and stale pine. an attempt to mask the underlying scent of old dust. "And Caleb," Beatrice said, not looking at him as he maneuvered the bags through the door. "Please try not to scuff the hardwood with those boots. We just had the floors done." I looked at the floor. They had not been done. The scratches from the dog they had 5 years ago were still visible near the baseboards. "I will be careful." "Mrs. Sterling," Caleb said, his voice polite and subservient. "Put the bags in the guest room above the garage," she instructed, pointing vaguely toward the back of the house. "The main guest suites are occupied. We need the space for Timothy's associates and the staging area." The room above the garage had no insulation. It was essentially a glorified storage locker. I felt a flash of anger, hot and sharp, but I tamped it down. This was the role. We walked through the hallway toward the kitchen. The house was cluttered. Boxes of wedding favors, ribbons, and sample floral arrangements were stacked everywhere. In the living room, I saw my sister, Savannah. She was lounging on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, while a woman on her hands and knees was scrubbing the baseboard of the fireplace. At first glance, I thought it was a hired maid. Then the woman turned her head to dip the rag into a bucket, and I recognized the profile. It was Aunt May, my father's distant cousin. She was in her 60s, a sweet woman who had fallen on hard times years ago. "You missed a spot there." "May?" Savannah said without looking up from her screen. "The soot stains are really stubborn. You need to use more elbow grease." I stopped dead. Savannah looked up, her eyes widening slightly as she saw me. She did not get up. "Harper, you made it!" she exclaimed, her voice high and pitchy. "God, you look tired. Doesn't she look tired?" "Mom." She had the glow of someone who had never worried about a mortgage payment in her life. Her hair was freshly blown out, her nails manicured to perfection. She pointed a manicured finger at me. "Don't just stand there," she added. "If you are staying, you can help May. We need this room perfect for the engagement photos tomorrow." I looked at Aunt May, who gave me a weary, embarrassed smile. She wiped her hands on her apron, clearly ashamed to be seen like this by family. "Hi, Harper," May said softly. "Hi, Aunt May," I said, ignoring Savannah. "Let me get you a glass of water." Before I could move, the sound of heavy footsteps coming down the main staircase echoed through the hall. Ladies, let's keep the energy up. We have a timeline to execute." The voice was loud, projecting a confidence that felt entirely unearned. I turned to see Timothy descending the stairs. He was exactly as I had pictured him from his digital footprint, only shorter. He was wearing a navy blue suit that was too tight across the shoulders, a modern cut that was meant to look European, but looked constrictive on his frame. His hair was gelled back aggressively, but my eyes, trained by years of analyzing assets and liabilities, went straight to his wrist. It was a gold Rolex Daytona. To the untrained eye, it was a $40,000 watch, but as he gripped the banister, the light caught the dial. The spacing of the subdials was off by a fraction of a millimeter. The gold tone was a shade too yellow, lacking the deep luster of real 18-karat alloy. It was a super clone, a high-end fake that cost maybe $600. Timothy reached the bottom of the stairs and struck a pose. Adjusting his cufflinks, "You must be the sister," he said, pointing a finger at me like a gun. "Harper, write the tech support." I smiled. A tight, thin line. That is me. "And this," he turned his gaze to Caleb, who had returned from the garage. Timothy looked Caleb up and down, sneering at the flannel and the sawdust that still clung faintly to his jeans. This must be the muscle. Caleb extended a hand. "Caleb Sterling, nice to meet you." Timothy looked at the hand for a second, then gave it a limp, dismissive shake, wiping his palm on his trousers immediately after. "Timothy, CEO of Tech Future, but you probably already know that. It is all over the business news." "I haven't seen it," Caleb said mildly. Timothy laughed. A sharp, barking sound. "Well, I doubt the Wall Street Journal gets delivered to wherever you people live. Seattle. Is it? I hear the lumber industry is dying out there. Tough break. Dinner that night was a masterclass in humiliation." We sat in the formal dining room. The chandelier was dimmed, likely to hide the dust on the crystals. My mother had set the table with her usual rigid precision, but the hierarchy was blatant. At the head of the table sat my father, Richard. He looked older, his face gray and drawn, but he perked up whenever Timothy spoke. To his right sat Timothy, and to his left, Savannah. They were eating off the good china the Royal Doulton set that was reserved for governors and senators. Caleb and I were placed at the far end of the table. Near the swinging door to the kitchen, our place settings were different. We had the everyday stoneware, the kind with chips in the rim. I looked down at my plate, then at Caleb's. He didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't care. He was cutting his pot roast with the same calm precision he used to shape oak. "So," Timothy said, waving his fork in the air, a piece of meat dangerously close to flying off. "The Series A funding is practically a lock. We are looking at a valuation of $40 million pre-money. The investors are begging to get in, literally begging. I had to turn down a venture capital firm from Silicon Valley yesterday because they did not align with my vision of the paradigm shift." "Paradigm shift," my father repeated, tasting the words like fine wine. "That is brilliant, Timothy. Just brilliant. It is all about the blockchain integration into the gig economy," Timothy continued, spewing buzzwords that meant absolutely nothing. "We are disrupting the disruptors." I took a sip of water. The glass tasted of detergent. "What exactly is the product, Timothy?" I asked quietly. The table went silent. Savannah glared at me. Mom put her fork down with a sharp clank. "Harper, don't be rude," Mom hissed. "It is okay." "Beatrice," Timothy said, holding up a hand magnanimously, "it is a fair question for a layperson. See, Harper, it is not about a product in the traditional sense. That is old-world thinking. We are selling an ecosystem, a synergy between user interface and lifestyle management. You would not understand the back-end architecture." I suppressed a laugh. I had written the back-end architecture for 3 of the banking systems his investors likely used. "Right," I said. "Synergy." My father turned to Caleb, his expression souring. "Unlike some people, Timothy is building the future. He is not just working with his hands. Comparison is the thief of joy." "Richard," Caleb said, taking a bite of a potato, "but the roast is delicious." Timothy leaned forward, his elbows on the table, a breach of etiquette my mother would have slapped me for. But she smiled at him adoringly. "So, Caleb," he said, his voice dropping to a mock sympathetic register, "are you still doing the whole furniture thing, making chairs and tables?" "I am," Caleb said. "Is there any money in that, I mean? Real money? Because I have to be honest, looking at you two." Timothy gestured vaguely at our clothes. "It looks like a struggle. No offense. None taken," Caleb said. "We get by?" "Well, look," Timothy said, puffing out his chest. "I am a generous guy. Family helps family. Right, once Tech Future moves into our new headquarters downtown, we are looking at the Obsidian Tower. Top-tier stuff. We are going to need a security team. You look like a big guy. You can handle yourself." My heart stopped for a second. "The Obsidian Tower," Timothy continued. "Oblivious. I could put in a word for you, get you a job at the front desk or patrolling the perimeter. It is hourly, but with overtime, you might make enough to buy your wife a decent dress." The insult hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Savannah snickered behind her napkin. My father nodded, as if this was a gracious offer from a feudal lord to a peasant. I gripped my fork, my knuckles turning white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that Caleb did not need a job at the Obsidian Tower, because Caleb owned the Obsidian Tower. I wanted to tell him that the security team he was talking about reported to a director of operations who reported to Caleb. But I felt Caleb's hand under the table. It rested on my knee, heavy and warm. A signal. Wait. Caleb dabbed his mouth with his paper napkin. "We did not get the linen ones." He looked at Timothy, his expression unreadable, his eyes calm and terrifyingly deep. "That is a very generous offer." "Timothy," Caleb said slowly, "the Obsidian Tower is a magnificent building. The structural integrity is world-class." Timothy blinked. Yeah, sure, it is big. I will keep it in mind, Caleb continued. But I find that I prefer being the one who builds the table, rather than the one who guards it. You never know when the legs might give out if the craftsmanship is poor. Timothy frowned, sensing an insult but not intelligent enough to decode it. My parents just stared, confused. Well, Timothy said, leaning back and checking his fake watch. Offer stands, but do not wait too long. Positions fill up fast when you are attached to a rocket ship like me. I looked at Caleb. He picked up his glass of water and took a sip, hiding a small, wolfish smile. They had no idea. They were dining with lions and thought they were feeding stray cats. The check was coming, and it was going to bounce so hard it would shatter everything. The guest room above the garage was less of a suite and more of a cryogenic chamber. The insulation was non-existent, and the portable heater Caleb had found in the corner rattled like a dying engine, pushing out lukewarm air that dissipated before it reached the bed. But the cold wasn't what kept me awake. It was the math. My brain has always processed the world in data streams, while others saw emotions or social cues. I saw patterns, probabilities, and bottom lines. And the bottom line of this evening's dinner did not add up. Timothy's suit was a lie. His watch was a lie. His jargon was a lie, which meant his presence here was an active threat. At 2 a.m, I gave up on sleep. I slipped out of the warmth of the quilt, careful not to wake Caleb, who was breathing deeply, his arm thrown over his eyes. I pulled on my coat over my pajamas and crept down the exterior stairs, heading toward the main house to get a glass of water. The kitchen lights were off, but a sliver of yellow illumination spilled out from under the door of my father's study down the hall. Voices drifted through the gap, hushed but intense. I stopped, my back pressed against the hallway wall, and listened. I told you it would be fine. Beatrice, my father's voice said. It sounded thin, stretched to the breaking point. Timothy said the return on investment is guaranteed at 20% a month. Do the math. In 5 months, we make the principal back. Everything after that is pure profit. 20% a month. My stomach dropped. That was not an investment return. That was the mathematical marker of a Ponzi scheme. Even high-risk hedge funds did not promise that kind of consistency. But the house, Richard, my mother whimpered. It was the first time I had heard genuine fear in her voice in years. We took out a second mortgage. If this goes wrong, we do not just lose the retirement fund, we lose the roof over our heads. It won't go wrong, Dad snapped, though the conviction was weak. He is a genius. You heard him. The IPO is weeks away. This is just bridge capital. We are helping family. And when Savannah is the wife of a billionaire, do you think she will let us starve? This is insurance. Beatrice, we gave him $500,000. That buys us a lot of gratitude. I squeezed my eyes shut. $500,000. They had liquidated everything, their IRAs, their savings, and they had leveraged the equity in the house to the hilt. They had handed $500,000 to a man wearing a fake Rolex because they were too blinded by greed to check the serial number. I did not go into the kitchen. I turned around and went back to the garage, but not to sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. The Wi-Fi signal from the main house was weak, but my external antenna picked it up easily. I didn't need to hack their network. I had the password from the last time I visited 3 years ago. They had never changed it. Sterling Manor 1. It was time to see who Timothy really was. I started with the company, Tech Future. Timothy had claimed it was registered in Delaware, the standard for corporate entities. I ran a query through the Delaware Division of Corporations database. Nothing. No record of a Tech Future LLC or incorporated. Founded in the last 5 years. I broadened the search. I ran a crawler through every business registry in the 50 states. It took 7 minutes for a hit to come back. Tech Future Holdings, registered in Nevada 3 months ago. Nevada offers strong privacy protections for business owners, which makes it a haven for shell companies. But I wasn't a standard user. I accessed a proprietary database that Aegis Ghost maintained, a tool we used to vet clients for money laundering risks. It cross-referenced registered agents with known commercial addresses. I pulled up the satellite imagery of the registered headquarters for Tech Future. Timothy had described it as a campus, a hub of innovation. On the screen, the coordinates pointed to a dusty, vacant lot behind a strip mall in Henderson, Nevada. There was no glass building, no security team, just tumbleweeds and a rusted chain-link fence. I felt a cold thrill of vindication, followed immediately by nausea. The company was a ghost. Now for the man. Timothy had been careful to scrub his digital footprint, likely paying a reputation management firm to flood the search results with generic bot-generated articles praising his vision. But the internet never truly forgets. I used facial recognition software, uploading the photo I had surreptitiously taken of him at dinner. The software scanned millions of public records, mugshots, and archived social media profiles. The match came back with a 99% probability. His name wasn't Timothy, it was Todd. Todd Michael Henderson. The profile that loaded was a rap sheet, not a resume. Arrested 3 years ago in Florida for wire fraud. Arrested 2 years before that in Arizona for check kiting. There were civil judgments against him from 3 different women who had sued him for what the court documents called romance fraud. He had a pattern. He targeted families with assets but low financial literacy, charmed the daughters, promised the fathers massive returns, and then vanished the day after the wedding or the engagement party, taking the investments and the jewelry with him. He wasn't an entrepreneur. He was a predator. And my family was the gazelle limping at the back of the herd. I closed the laptop as the sun began to bleed gray light through the single window. I had the smoking gun. Now I just had to get someone to look at it without shooting the messenger. The morning air was crisp. I found Savannah on the back patio, overseeing the installation of a floral archway. She was wrapped in a white silk robe that looked expensive but still had the tag tucked into the collar, suggesting she planned to return it after the photo shoot. "Savannah," I said, stepping onto the stone pavers. She didn't turn around. "If you are looking for breakfast, Mom put out some bagels in the kitchen. Don't eat the smoked salmon. Though, that is for the guests. We need to talk," I said, my voice low and serious. She sighed, a dramatic exhalation of breath, and finally turned to face me. "Can it wait? I have a hair appointment in 45 minutes and the florist is incompetent. It is about Timothy," I said. Her expression hardened instantly. "What about him?" I stepped closer, keeping my hands visible, non-threatening. "I did some research last night. I was curious about his company." "Savannah, Tech Future doesn't exist. The address is a dirt lot in Nevada." She laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. "You were spying on him, God. Harper, you are pathetic. I am not spying. I am doing due diligence." I pulled out my phone, where I had saved the mugshot of Todd Henderson. "And his name isn't Timothy, it is Todd. He has a record in Florida for fraud." "Look," I held the phone out. She glanced at it for a split second, then slapped my hand away. The phone clattered onto the patio table. "I am not looking at your Photoshop projects," she spat. "It is not Photoshop. Savannah, it is a police record. He is scamming you. He is scamming Mom and Dad. They gave him $500,000, didn't they?" Her face went pale, then red. "Who told you that? Did you eavesdrop on them? It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is that the money is gone. He is going to take it and run. You have to stop the party. You have to freeze the accounts." She stepped into my personal space, her eyes narrowing into slits. "You know what this is? This is jealousy, pure and simple. You cannot stand that I am marrying a genius. You cannot stand that I am going to be rich and powerful while you are stuck in a garage with a carpenter. You want to ruin my happiness because yours is so miserable. Savannah, listen to me." "No, you listen," she screamed, drawing the attention of the florists. "You are toxic. Harper, Mom was right. We shouldn't have invited you. Just because you married a loser doesn't mean I have to. Timothy is a visionary. You are just a bitter, small-minded nobody." She spun on her heel and stormed back into the house, leaving me standing alone in the cold morning light. I retrieved my phone. The screen was uncracked. Unlike my sister's delusion, The backlash was swift. By the time I went back inside, the narrative had already been twisted. I found my parents in the kitchen. My mother was clutching a handkerchief, and my father was staring at me with a look of profound disgust. Timothy stood by the espresso machine, looking shaken and victimized. "I cannot believe you." "Harper," my father said, his voice trembling with rage. I looked at Timothy. He met my gaze, and for a second, the mask slipped. There was a smirk there, a cold, calculating glint in his eyes. He knew I knew, and he had moved first. "Timothy just told us." My mother sobbed. "He told us you cornered him in the hallway this morning." I raised an eyebrow. "I did. He said you asked him for $20,000. Dad said, he said you begged him for a loan because Caleb is in debt to some dangerous people. And when he politely refused, you threatened to make up lies about him." I stared at them. The lie was so clumsy, so easily disprovable if they just looked at my bank account. But they didn't want the truth. They wanted the lie because the lie protected their ego. "That is not what happened," I said calmly. "Don't lie to us," Dad shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. "We know you are struggling. We know you are envious. But blackmail, threatening to ruin your sister's engagement because you cannot pay your bills, that is a new low. Even for you." Timothy stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on my father's shoulder. "It is okay. Richard, I understand. Desperation makes people do crazy things. I am not pressing charges. I just want Harper to understand that she cannot extort family." He looked at me, his eyes dead. "I forgive you. Harper, just please don't spoil tonight. For Savannah's sake." I looked at the three of them, the victims defending the predator. It was a psychological masterclass. He had inoculated them against the truth. Any evidence I showed them now would be dismissed as part of my revenge for the denied loan. "I understand," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I won't say another word." I turned and walked out. I didn't go to the garage. I went to the side of the house. Near the library window, where the hedges were thick, I knew Timothy. Men like him, when they get cornered, they accelerate the timeline. He had successfully neutralized me, but my presence had spooked him. He wouldn't wait for the IPO excuse. He would run soon. I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then the library window slid open a few inches. Timothy needed a smoke, and he needed privacy. I pressed myself into the boxwoods, the branches scratching my face. I heard the click of a lighter, then the exhale of smoke, then the sound of a burner phone being dialed. "Yeah, it is me," Timothy whispered. His voice was different now. The sophisticated affectation was gone, replaced by a rough, street-smart cadence. Pause. "Yeah, the sister is a problem. She is smart. She ran a background check. I handled it, spun it back on her. But she knows." Pause. "No. I can't wait until next week. The old man transferred the liquidity yesterday. It is sitting in the shell account. I need you to wash it and move it to the Cayman holding by midnight." He took a drag of the cigarette. "Yeah, I am cleaning out the safe during the party tonight. There is a lot of jewelry coming in. Gifts from the aunts. I will hit the road right after the toast. I told them I have a surprise conference call with Tokyo." He laughed. A cruel, ugly sound. Idiots. Complete idiots. The dad practically thanked me for taking his life savings. "Listen, have the car ready at the back gate at 10 o'clock. I am ghosting this place." He shut the window. I stood there in the bushes, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from adrenaline. Midnight. He was moving the money tonight. He was fleeing at 10 o'clock. I checked my watch. It was 2 in the afternoon. I had 8 hours. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Caleb, who was presumably still in the garage being punished by the family's cold shoulder. Code red. "He runs tonight. Initiate protocol." Then I sent a second message, this one to my executive assistant at Aegis Ghost. "Authorize Project Phoenix. I need full dossier on subject Todd Michael Henderson. Connect with local law enforcement liaison. Stand by for digital evidence packet." I walked back toward the garage. The time for warnings was over. They wouldn't listen to Harper the daughter. They wouldn't listen to Harper the poor relation. Tonight, they were going to have to listen to Harper the CEO, and I was going to bring the whole house down around them to save them from themselves. The hours leading up to the engagement party were not a celebration. They were a sentence of hard labor served under the watchful, critical eye of my mother. While Savannah spent the afternoon at a luxury spa getting a diamond dust facial, I was relegated to the scullery maid role I had been cast in since birth. There were 20 linen tablecloths that needed ironing, not steaming ironing. Beatrice insisted that steam didn't get the crisp edges she required for Timothy's caliber of guests, so there I stood in the laundry room, the heat from the industrial iron pressing sweat onto my forehead, while my mother hovered, pointing out invisible wrinkles. "Missed a spot," she said, tapping a perfectly smooth corner with her manicured nail. "Honestly, Harper, one would think you would have picked up some domestic skills since you clearly haven't been focusing on a career." I didn't answer. I just pressed the iron down harder, imagining it was her judgment I was flattening. Outside, through the laundry room window, I could see Caleb. My father had decided that the landscaping crew was too expensive for a last-minute touch-up, so he had volunteered Caleb to mow the 3-acre lawn and trim the hedges. My husband, whose time was billed at $4,000 an hour when he consulted on urban planning, was currently pushing a rusted lawnmower that belched blue smoke. Sweating in the Virginia humidity, he looked up, catching my eye through the glass. He didn't look angry, he winked. It was a small, secret signal that kept me tethered to reality. "Let them dig," his eyes said. "The deeper the hole, the harder they fall." Around 4 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was Aunt May, the sweet, fluttery cousin who had been cleaning the baseboards earlier. She had returned with a tray of homemade cookies, a humble offering amidst the catered extravagance. I was in the hallway carrying a stack of heavy silver platters, my back aching when she saw me. "Oh, Harper," she exclaimed, her face lighting up. "Look at you." "You know, I was just telling my bridge club about you. I remember when you won that mathematics competition in high school. You were always the brilliant one, the one with the head for numbers." I smiled, genuinely touched. "Thanks, Aunt May. That feels like a lifetime ago." Beatrice swept into the hall, her heels clicking like gunshots on the hardwood. She took the tray of cookies from May with a polite but dismissive smile, handing them immediately to a server to hide in the back. "Oh, May, you are too kind," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But let's not rewrite history. Harper had book smarts. Sure, but look where it got her." She gestured at me, sweating, holding a stack of plates, wearing my cheap gray clothes. "Smart doesn't pay the bills." "May," she continued, "if she was truly smart, she wouldn't have married a man who mows lawns for a living. Intelligence without ambition is just a hobby, and frankly, marrying poor is the stupidest thing a woman can do. It is a waste, just a waste." May looked down, embarrassed. I tightened my grip on the silver platters until my knuckles turned white. "I am happy, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "That is not a waste." Beatrice laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Happiness is easy when you have low standards. Darling, Savannah is happy, and she is going to be spending her summers on the Amalfi Coast. That is the difference." Speaking of the Amalfi Coast, Timothy strolled into the room. He was holding a brochure, his face flushed with the manic energy of a con artist near the finish line. "Richard Beatrice. You have to see this," he boomed. My father hurried out of the study, adjusting his glasses. "What is it?" "Son, I just got off the phone with the broker," Timothy said, slapping the brochure against his palm. "I found it. The yacht. It is a 150-footer. Helipad. Jacuzzi. The works. I am thinking of putting a deposit down next week, after the IPO closes. And here is the best part. I want you two to come on the maiden voyage. 3 weeks in the Mediterranean. My treat." My parents looked at each other, their eyes wide with avarice. They were practically salivating. "Oh," Timothy Beatrice gasped, clutching her pearls. "That sounds divine." "It is the least I can do," Timothy said, grinning. "But, Richard, there is a small hiccup. The broker needs a proof of liquidity from a guarantor to hold the vessel until my funds clear." Just a formality. Since my accounts are locked for the IPO, I was wondering if you could sign a temporary authorization. It is not a transfer, just a paper that says you vouch for the funds. Of course, Richard said, not even asking to read the document. Anything for the family yacht. They walked into the study to sign yet another death warrant for their finances. I stood there, helpless, watching them sign away whatever scraps were left of their credit rating. 10 minutes later, I went outside to bring Caleb a glass of lemonade. He was taking a break near the garage, leaning against the side of his truck. He looked serious. "You okay?" I asked, handing him the glass. He took a long drink, then wiped his mouth. "I am fine. But we have a new data point." "What is it?" "Timothy's car," he said, nodding toward the sleek black sedan parked in the driveway. "The Maserati? What about it?" "I was trimming the hedges near the driveway," Caleb explained. "The valet key was on the seat. The glove box was open. I saw the registration. It is not his. It is a rental from a luxury fleet in D.C. And Harper. There was a repo notice on the passenger seat. It is 3 days overdue. The company has been calling the car's GPS tracker all morning." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. He is drowning. He is borrowing time on everything. "He is going to bolt," Caleb said. "Men like this don't stick around when the repo trucks start circling." "I know," I said. "I heard him on the phone. He is leaving tonight. 10 o'clock. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Then we need to stop him before he takes the cash." I nodded. "I'm going to try one last time. I have to. They are my parents. Even if they are them, I have to give them one last chance to see the truth before I burn the fantasy down." I found my parents in the living room. Timothy had gone upstairs to change for the party. Savannah was there, too, examining her nails. "Mom, Dad, Savannah, I need you to listen to me," I said. My tone was different this time. It wasn't pleading. It was commanding. It was the voice I used when I walked into a boardroom to tell a CEO his security infrastructure was compromised. They looked up, surprised by the shift in my demeanor. "What now?" "Harper," Dad sighed. "We are busy." I walked to the center of the room. "Timothy is a fraud." Beatrice groaned. "Oh, for heaven's sake. Not this again. He is renting the car," I said, ticking off points on my fingers. "It is overdue for repossession. His company is a shell entity registered to a vacant lot. His name is Todd Henderson. He has a criminal record for fraud, and he is planning to leave tonight with your money." "Stop it," Savannah screamed, jumping up. "Just stop it. You are a liar." "I am not lying," I said, my voice rising. "Look at the facts. He asked you for liquidity for a yacht. That is a classic advance fee scam. He asked for cash for the deposit. That is money laundering." "Dad, look at the documents you signed. Did you read them? Or did you just see the dollar signs?" "Enough," my father roared. He slammed his hand on the coffee table so hard a vase rattled. His face was purple with rage. "I have had enough of your poison. Harper, you are a jealous, petty, ungrateful child. You cannot stand that Savannah found a winner. You cannot stand that she is going to be better than you. You want to drag us all down to your level of mediocrity." "Dad, I am trying to save you," I pleaded. "You are trying to humiliate us," he shouted. "Timothy is a godsend. He is the son I never had. And you? You are the disappointment. You and that dirt-poor husband of yours. Do not speak another word about him. I forbid it." I looked at my mother. "Mom." Beatrice looked at me with eyes cold as ice. She didn't shout. Her voice was quiet, which made it worse. "I regret inviting you. Harper," she said. "I truly do. You are a dark cloud over this family. I should have just left you in Seattle. I should have forgotten you existed, just like I wanted to at Christmas. At least then we would have peace." The words hit me like a physical blow. I should have forgotten you existed. I stood there for a long moment. The silence in the room was absolute. I looked at Savannah, who was smirking through her fake tears. I looked at my father, who was panting from his outburst. I looked at my mother, who had turned her back to me to adjust a flower arrangement. Something inside me clicked. It was the sound of the final tether snapping. The bridge wasn't just burned, it was atomized. "Okay," I said softly. I turned and walked out. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I walked with the steady, measured pace of an executioner walking toward the switch. I went out to the garage. Caleb was waiting. He took one look at my face and knew. "They didn't listen?" he asked. "No," I said. "They didn't." He nodded. "What is the play?" I pulled out my phone. My fingers flew across the screen. I typed a message to my assistant, my thumbs hitting the glass with lethal precision. "Execute Project Phoenix. I want the full dossier, every bank transfer, every fake LLC, the mugshots, the victim statements. Compile it into a presentation format. I need it ready for casting to a remote display by 8 p.m. Eastern." I looked at Caleb. "Get your suit." I said. "The real one." He raised an eyebrow. "The Italian wool. Yes. And shave. We are done playing the poor relations." He smiled. "And what are you going to wear?" I looked back at the house, looming large and corrupt against the twilight sky. "I am going to wear the dress I bought in Paris." I said, "The one that costs more than Savannah's entire wedding. It is time to show them exactly who they forgot to invite." The transformation of the house was a testament to the power of desperate illusion. By 7 o'clock, the stale smell of anxiety had been masked by the scent of heavy lilies and expensive cologne. The lighting was dimmed to a strategic amber glow. Hiding the scuffs on the floorboards and the peeling paint on the crown molding, a string quartet, hired for 3 hours at a rate my father would likely try to haggle down later, played soft classical music in the corner of the living room, their boredom evident in the slumping of their shoulders. I stood at the top of the stairs, pausing for a moment before descending into the lion's den. I had traded my gray sweater and jeans for the dress I had brought from Seattle, just in case. It was a floor-length black sheath of liquid silk, custom cut by a designer in Paris who did not advertise and whose waiting list was usually closed to anyone without a royal title. There were no sequins, no logos, no flash. It was the kind of garment that whispered power rather than screaming for attention. Caleb stood beside me. The transformation was even more striking. Gone was the flannel and the sawdust. He wore a charcoal suit cut from Italian wool that draped perfectly over his broad shoulders. He had shaved, revealing the sharp, strong jawline usually hidden by stubble. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who could buy this entire neighborhood without checking his bank balance. But I knew my family. They would not see the suit. They would only see the man they had decided to despise. "Ready?" he asked, offering me his arm. I took it, as ready as I will ever be. We descended the stairs. The room was already crowded. My parents had invited everyone they knew, neighbors, church members, old business associates my father hadn't spoken to in years. Mixed in with them were a dozen or so strangers who didn't quite fit. They were too loud, their laughter too performative. These must have been Timothy's business partners, the props he had rented to flesh out his stage play. Savannah was holding court near the fireplace, wearing a white cocktail dress that was encrusted with enough rhinestones to blind a pilot. She spotted me coming down the stairs and excused herself from a group of adoring aunts to intercept me at the bottom. She looked me up and down, her lip curling. "Black?" she asked, her voice pitched just loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Really? Harper, it is an engagement party, not a wake. You look like you're going to a funeral." I smoothed the silk at my hip, offering her a calm smile. I thought it was appropriate. I said, "Given the gravity of the occasion," she narrowed her eyes, sensing an insult but unable to pin it down. "And him," she gestured vaguely at Caleb. "I hope he knows not to eat all the shrimp. We have important guests tonight." Caleb smiled. The picture of polite deference. "I will stick to the crackers." "Savannah, don't worry." She huffed and spun away, her rhinestones catching the light like a disco ball. We moved through the room. My mother was circulating with a tray of champagne, playing the gracious hostess. When she saw us, her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before reassembling itself. She didn't come over. She steered her group of friends in the opposite direction, effectively cutting us out of the social circle. It was fascinating to watch the dynamic. Caleb and I stood near the French doors, holding glasses of sparkling wine that tasted like vinegar and sugar. We were the only people in the room not vibrating with nervous energy. My father was sweating through his shirt, laughing too hard at jokes that weren't funny. Timothy was everywhere at once, shaking hands, clapping shoulders, checking his fake watch every 3 minutes. At one point, my father approached us, but only because he needed something. "Caleb," he said, not making eye contact, "the valet is overwhelmed. Could you go out front and help park the cars? We have some VIPs arriving, and I don't want them waiting." I felt Caleb's muscles tense under his suit jacket. It was a deliberate humiliation, asking a guest, his son-in-law, to work as a parking attendant. Caleb took a sip of his wine, his eyes locking onto my father's face. "I am afraid I cannot do that." "Richard," Caleb said smoothly, "I am not insured to drive other people's vehicles. I would hate to scratch a rental." My father's face went red. "A rental? What are you talking about? These are luxury automobiles." Caleb just smiled and turned his attention back to the room, dismissing my father with a silence so profound it felt like a slap. My father spluttered for a moment, then stomped away. At 8:30, the music stopped. Timothy climbed onto a small riser that had been set up in front of the fireplace. He tapped a microphone, the feedback screeching through the room and making everyone wince. "Testing, testing," he said, flashing a blinding, cap-toothed smile. "Can everyone hear me?" A ripple of applause went through the room, led enthusiastically by the hired partners. Thank you, Timothy said, basking in the adoration. "I want to thank Richard and Beatrice for opening their magnificent home to us tonight, and of course, my beautiful bride-to-be, Savannah." Savannah beamed, clutching his arm. "But tonight isn't just about love," Timothy continued, his voice dropping to a serious, confidential register. "It is about the future. As many of you know, my company, Tech Future, is on the verge of a historic milestone. Next week, we ring the bell on Wall Street." More applause. My father looked around the room, nodding vigorously, as if to say, "See, I told you he was a genius. The analysts are predicting an opening price of $50 a share." Timothy said, "But here's the thing. I don't want the Wall Street fat cats to get all the upside. I want the people I care about, the people in this room, to share in the wealth." He paused for effect. "I wasn't going to do this," he lied smoothly. "But seeing all the love in this room, I made a call to my CFO 10 minutes ago. I authorized a special friends and family allocation, an angel round, tonight only." He held up a stack of glossy brochures. "For anyone here tonight, I can offer pre-IPO shares at $5. That is a 10 times return guaranteed by next Friday. But I can only keep the window open until midnight." The room seemed to suck in a breath. I watched, horrified, but not surprised, as greed washed over the faces of my relatives. It was a classic pressure tactic. Create urgency. Promise impossible returns. Use social proof. "I will take $10,000 worth," shouted one of the hired partners from the back. "That broke the dam." "Me too." "Put me down for $5,000, said Uncle Bob, reaching for his checkbook. I saw Aunt May digging into her purse. I saw my parents beaming, looking like they had just won the lottery. Timothy's assistants, 2 young women in tight skirts, who looked like they had been recruited from a nightclub, started circulating with tablets and card readers. It was a feeding frenzy. They were signing away their savings, their children's college funds, their security, all for a lie told by a man in a polyester blend suit. I watched from the corner, my glass of wine untouched. The disgust I felt was cold and heavy in my stomach. "Look at them," I whispered to Caleb. "They are sheep walking into a slaughterhouse." Caleb was looking at the door. "We have a visitor," he said quietly. I followed his gaze. The front door had opened, and the valet, the real one, was leading a man inside. He was not on the guest list. He was older, with silver hair and a bearing that commanded immediate respect. He wore a suit that made Timothy's look like a costume. It was Marcus Thorne, the real CEO of Omnicorp. the largest tech conglomerate on the East Coast, a man whose net worth was public knowledge and started with a B. He looked around the room, confused. He checked his phone. Timothy froze on the riser. His face went the color of curdled milk. Marcus Thorne spotted Caleb. His eyes widened in genuine surprise. "Caleb," he called out, his voice booming over the murmur of the crowd. "Caleb Sterling." The room went silent. Everyone looked from the famous billionaire to the carpenter in the corner. Marcus walked straight past my gaping father and approached us. Hand extended. "I didn't expect to see you here," Marcus said, shaking Caleb's hand warmly. "I thought you were in Zurich for the summit. We decided to take a holiday," Caleb said, smiling easily. "Visiting the in-laws, Marcus. This is my wife, Harper." Marcus turned to me. "The Harper. The one who designed the Aegis protocol. It is an honor. We use your encryption for our entire server farm." A murmur ran through the room. Aegis protocol. Encryption. My father looked like he was having a stroke. Timothy, realizing he was losing control of the narrative, jumped down from the riser. "Sir, excuse me," he shouted, rushing over. "This is a private event. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Marcus looked at Timothy, then at the logo on the banner behind him. "Tech Future." "Yes," Timothy said, sweating profusely. "And you are a competitor. This is corporate espionage. I know who you are. Thorne, you are here to steal my IP." Marcus laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound. "Steal your IP, son." I drove past and saw the lights. I thought this was the fundraiser for the Historical Society. I have never heard of Tech Future in my life, and if you are claiming an IPO next week, you should probably know that the SEC filing deadline was yesterday. I checked the list. You are not on it. The silence that followed was absolute. Timothy looked around. Panic wild in his eyes. "He is lying. He is trying to tank the stock. Don't listen to him. He is jealous." My father stepped forward, looking unsure. "Timothy, what is he talking about? He is a plant!" Timothy screamed, his voice cracking. "Harper hired him. It is an actor." Marcus Thorne looked at Caleb and raised an eyebrow. "An actor? That is a new one." It was time. I handed my wine glass to a passing waiter. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. I just started walking toward the center of the room. The sound of my heels on the hardwood was a steady, rhythmic cadence. Click, click, click. The crowd parted for me. I walked up to the riser where Timothy had been standing. I picked up the remote control for the large projection screen that was currently displaying a spinning 3D logo of Tech Future. "Harper," my mother hissed from the front row. "Get down from there. You are embarrassing us." Timothy lunged for me. "Give me that." Caleb stepped in his path. He didn't push him. He just stood there, a solid wall of Italian wool and muscle. Timothy bounced off him and stumbled back. I stood on the riser, looking down at the sea of faces. I saw my parents, angry and confused. I saw Savannah, terrified. I saw Aunt May, holding her checkbook. I raised the microphone. "Before anyone signs another check," I said, my voice amplified and clear, cutting through the tension like a scalpel, "I have a special engagement gift for the happy couple. I think it is important that everyone sees exactly what they are investing in." I pointed the remote at the screen. Timothy screamed, "Cut the power! Someone cut the power!" But it was too late. I pressed the button. The spinning logo vanished. In its place, the screen filled with a high-resolution document. It wasn't a stock chart. It wasn't a business plan. It was a flowchart of money. And at the top, in bold red letters, was the name Project Phoenix, the Henderson Dossier. The image on the projection screen stabilized, casting a harsh, blue-white light over the shocked faces of the guests. It was not a slide deck of wedding photos or a romantic montage of the happy couple. It was a raw, unfiltered data visualization from the Aegis Ghost financial tracking algorithm, the same interface used by forensic accountants at the FBI. I swiped my thumb across my phone screen, and the projection zoomed in. "This is a real-time ledger of the wire transfer my father sent yesterday," I said, my voice cool and detached. cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. On the screen, a thick green line represented $500,000, leaving the account labeled Richard and Beatrice Sterling, Retirement. It traveled across the digital map to a node labeled Tech Future Holdings, NV. See that, I asked, pointing with the remote. That is the seed money, the investment in the future. I swiped again. The green line turned bright crimson. And here is where it went 30 minutes later. The red line split into 3 distinct streams. One shot toward an offshore account labeled Grand Cayman Shell 4. Another went to a digital wallet flagged as crypto mixing service. But the largest chunk, over $250,000, flowed directly to a domestic account. The label on the destination account was not a bank or a vendor. It read, Vegas Sportsbook, Outstanding Debt Settlement. The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen right out of the air. That is not a business expense, I narrated, keeping my eyes on Timothy. That is a gambling debt. Specifically, a marker called in by a syndicate that does not accept late payments. Timothy, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly lunged toward the AV table. "Turn it off!" he screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek. "It is a hack. She hacked the system." He scrambled for the power cord, desperate to kill the image. But Caleb was faster. My husband did not run. He simply stepped into the space between Timothy and the wall. When Timothy tried to shove past him, Caleb caught him. He didn't strike him. He didn't need to. Caleb just clamped one large, calloused hand onto Timothy's shoulder and squeezed. The effect was immediate. Timothy crumpled slightly, his knees buckling under the pressure of a grip developed by lifting oak beams and framing houses. He let out a yelp of pain, his arm going limp. "Stay put." "Todd," Caleb said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the silent room. "The show is not over." I swiped the phone screen again. The financial chart vanished, replaced by a photograph. It was high resolution, grainy but unmistakable. It showed a man holding a black placard with a booking number. He was younger, his hair was messy, and he was wearing an orange jumpsuit. But the face was identical. The weak chin, the close-set eyes, the smirk of a man who thought he was smarter than the law. Beneath the face, the text from the Florida Department of Corrections was legible even from the back of the room. Inmate Todd Michael Henderson. Charges wire fraud, grand larceny, impersonation of a licensed securities broker. A woman in the back row screamed. It was a short, sharp sound. My mother, Beatrice, swayed on her feet. Her face, usually so composed and painted with arrogance, went slack. She looked at the screen, then at Timothy, then at the checkbook she had been ready to open. Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed. It was a theatrical faint, the kind she had perfected to escape awkward social situations. But this time, nobody rushed to catch her. They were too busy staring at the screen. Lies. Savannah shrieked. My sister stomped onto the riser, standing in front of the screen as if her body could block the truth. She was trembling, her face a mask of ruined mascara and desperation. "It is a deep fake," she yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Harper made it. She is jealous. She used AI to make this. Todd is a genius. He is a billionaire." I looked at my sister with pity. She was not defending him. She was defending her own ego. She was defending the fantasy she had sold to her friends, the narrative of being the golden child who married the golden boy. To admit he was a fraud was to admit she was a fool, and Savannah would rather burn the house down than admit she was wrong. "Savannah," I said softly into the microphone, "look at the date on the mugshot. It is from 3 years ago, before AI could generate images that realistic. And look at the wrist." I pointed the laser pointer at the photo. In the mugshot, Todd had a distinctive tattoo on his inner forearm, a barcode. I looked down at Timothy, who was still pinned by Caleb. Timothy was sweating through his expensive suit, his cuff riding up. "Show them your arm." "Todd," I commanded. Timothy struggled, trying to pull his arm back, but Caleb ruthlessly rolled up the sleeve of the navy jacket. There, stamped in fading black ink, was the barcode. The room went deathly silent. Even Savannah stopped screaming. She stared at the tattoo, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "It is a misunderstanding." Timothy whimpered, the fight draining out of him. It was a frat prank. "A youthful indiscretion. It was a felony conviction." I corrected. "You served 18 months. You were released on parole, and you are currently in violation of that parole by leaving the state of Florida." My father, Richard, finally found his voice. He staggered forward, looking like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. He looked at the screen, where his life savings were shown draining into a gambling pit, and then he looked at me. How he stammered. "How did you get this?" I lowered the microphone slightly. "I told you. Dad, I ran a background check." But Richard shook his head, confusion warring with horror. "You just fix computers. You are tech support. How could you access locked banking records? How could you decrypt a shell company's ledger? That is military-grade stuff." I sighed. I walked down the steps of the riser, my heels clicking on the wood. I stopped right in front of him. "Dad," I said, my voice steady. "Do you know the antivirus software you have on your laptop? The one with the blue shield logo?" He nodded dumbly. "Yes, Aegis, and the encryption software the bank uses to protect your mortgage. And the firewall that protects the city's power grid, I suppose." He whispered, "I didn't fix those systems." "Dad," I said, allowing a hard edge to enter my voice. "I built them." I turned to face the room, addressing everyone. "My name is Harper Sterling, but in the industry, the company I founded is known as Aegis Ghost. I wrote the core code 10 years ago. I sold the majority stake to a defense contractor 3 years ago, but I retained full executive oversight and access to the proprietary investigation tools." I looked back at Timothy. His eyes were wide, filled with a dawn of terrifying recognition. He knew the name. Any con artist worth his salt knew the name Aegis Ghost. It was the software that hunted people like him. "You," Timothy whispered, his face draining of blood. "You are Ghost, I am." I confirmed. "And you didn't just try to scam a random family. You tried to scam the family of the woman who wrote the book on digital forensics." I turned back to my father. "I don't work for a salary." "Dad, the royalty checks from Aegis generate more in a week than Timothy claimed to be worth in a lifetime. I didn't come here to borrow money. I came here to stop you from throwing yours into a furnace." Richard stared at me. He looked at my simple black dress. He looked at Caleb's suit. The pieces were finally clicking into place. The reason we didn't care about their insults. The reason we didn't brag. We didn't need to. "You are rich," Richard asked, the word sounding foreign on his tongue. "I am secure," I said, "and you are broke, or you will be, if you don't listen to me right now." I turned my attention back to Timothy. He was looking at the French doors, calculating the distance. He knew the game was up. The confidence man facade had dissolved, leaving only a scared, cornered rat. "Let me go," he hissed at Caleb. "You don't know who you are messing with. I have friends, dangerous friends." Caleb laughed. It was a dark, amused sound. "I have friends too," Caleb said, "but mine carry badges." As if on cue, a sound pierced the heavy atmosphere of the room. It started low and distant, rising rapidly into a wail that everyone recognized. Sirens. Not just one, a chorus of them. Blue and red lights began to flash against the windows, strobing through the sheer curtains, painting the shocked faces of the guests in alternating colors of emergency. Timothy's head snapped toward the window. "You called the cops," he shouted at me. Genuine betrayal in his voice, as if we were playing a game and I had broken the rules. "I called the FBI," I corrected, "and the state police, and your parole officer in Florida. I believe they have a warrant for your arrest regarding a similar scheme in Texas last year." Timothy made his move. He stomped hard on Caleb's foot, or tried to. Caleb shifted his weight instantly, anticipating the move. Timothy stumbled. Losing his balance, he tried to twist away, flailing his free arm, reaching into his jacket pocket. Someone shouted. Guests screamed and dropped to the floor. My father dove behind the sofa. Savannah just stood there, paralyzed. But Timothy didn't pull a gun. He pulled a passport. He was trying to throw it or maybe check it in a moment of pure panic. Caleb didn't wait. He spun Timothy around, kicked his legs out from under him, and pinned him to the Persian rug face down. It was a seamless takedown, executed with the efficiency of a man who understood leverage and gravity. "Stay down," Caleb ordered, placing a knee in the center of Timothy's back. Timothy thrashed, spitting curses into the carpet. "You are making a mistake. I will sue you. I will sue all of you." The front door burst open. "Police, everybody stay where you are." 6 officers in tactical gear stormed into the foyer, their weapons drawn but lowered. Behind them walked a man in a suit, Agent Miller. My contact at the bureau. I had sent him the dossier at 8 o'clock sharp. Agent Miller scanned the room. He saw me and nodded. Then he saw Caleb holding Timothy down. "Clear the room," Miller shouted to his team. "Secure the suspect." 2 officers rushed forward, hauling Timothy up from the floor. They slapped handcuffs on him before he could even catch his breath. "Todd Michael Henderson," Agent Miller said, his voice calm and authoritative. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent." Timothy was dragged toward the door, his feet scuffing the hardwood floor my mother was so worried about. As he passed me, he stopped struggling for a second. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You ruined everything," he spat. "No, Todd," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "You ruined it when you forgot to check who you were inviting to dinner." As the police hauled him out into the flashing night, the room remained frozen. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sobbing of my sister and the slow, rhythmic beeping of the open line on my phone, which was still projecting the evidence of their foolishness for all to see. I looked at my parents. They were huddled together, looking small and defeated. The guests were starting to whisper, the shock wearing off and the gossip beginning. This would be the talk of the town for decades, the night the Sterlings were exposed as fools. I walked over to the AV table and unplugged my phone. The screen went black. "The show is over," I said into the silence. "You can all go home now." But nobody moved. They were waiting for the epilogue. They were waiting to see what the daughter they had called a failure would do next. I walked over to Caleb, who was adjusting his cuffs, looking unruffled. "Did you hurt your hand?" I asked. He flexed his fingers. "Hard head, but I am fine." I looked at my father, who was slowly standing up from behind the sofa. He looked at me, then at the door where his son-in-law had just been dragged out in cuffs. Then he looked at my bank balance, which I had briefly flashed on the screen before unplugging. "Harper," he crooned, his voice trembling with a new, sickening tone. Respect, fear, avarice. I held up a hand. "Save it, Dad. We are not done yet." The flashing blue and red lights from the squad cars outside sliced through the living room, turning the pastel floral arrangements into grotesque, pulsing shadows. The air was thick with the static of police radios and the murmurs of guests who were witnessing the social execution of the Sterling family. Timothy, or rather, Todd Henderson, was not going quietly. As the officers shoved him toward the threshold, his Italian leather shoes skidding on the hardwood my mother prized so dearly, he dug his heels in. He wasn't trying to escape anymore. The handcuffs were tight enough to cut off circulation. He was trying to get one last word in. He twisted his neck, locking eyes with my father, Richard. My father stood by the fireplace, one hand gripping the mantel as if the earth were shaking beneath him. He looked pale, hollowed out, a man watching his life's work burn down in real time. "You know why it was so easy," Richard Todd shouted, his voice rough and stripped of the cultured accent he had affected for months. He spat the words out like venom. "It wasn't because I am a genius. It was because you are greedy." The officer yanked him forward. But Todd laughed, a jagged, manic sound. "You saw the dollar signs and you went blind," he yelled over his shoulder. "You didn't care about the business plan. You just wanted the yacht. You wanted the bragging rights." My mother, who had been lying on the chaise lounge in a semi-conscious state, let out a whimper. Todd's eyes flicked to her. "And thanks for the mortgage money," he crowed. a cruel grin splitting his face. I spent the first 50,000 on a weekend in Macau. I drank your retirement in vintage champagne. Beatrice. You guys were the easiest mark I have hit in 5 years. Too proud to check the facts. Too desperate to look poor. Keep moving, the officer barked, shoving Todd through the doorway and into the night. The heavy oak door slammed shut, sealing the house. But the echo of his laughter seemed to linger in the foyer. For a long moment, nobody moved. The silence was absolute, heavier than the noise had been. Then, the sound of weeping broke the spell. It was Savannah. She was sitting on the floor in the center of the room, her legs sprawled out in an unladylike fashion, surrounded by the debris of her shattered dream. Her white cocktail dress, the one she had claimed cost $3,000, was pooling around her like a deflated parachute. She wasn't crying with relief that she had been saved from marrying a felon. She was crying with the petulant, furious grief of a child who had dropped her ice cream cone. My engagement, she wailed, pounding her fist against the rug. My engagement is ruined. Everyone is going to know. She looked up, her mascara running in black streaks down her cheeks, scanning the room for sympathy. She didn't find any. The guests, the so-called friends and business partners my parents had tried so hard to impress, were already retreating. It was an exodus of embarrassment. Nobody wanted to be associated with this disaster. They mumbled awkward excuses, avoiding eye contact with my parents. I think we should go. I heard Mrs. Gable say to her husband, "This is well, it is a police matter now." We have an early morning, another guest muttered, grabbing his coat from the rack without waiting for the valet. My father tried to stop them. He stepped forward, his hands trembling. "Wait, please. There is still cake. We have champagne. It is just a misunderstanding, a terrible mistake." But they didn't stop. They flowed around him like water around a stone, their faces tight with judgment. Within 10 minutes, the room was empty. The hired partners of Timothy had vanished the moment the handcuffs came out, likely fearful of their own warrants. The house, once buzzing with the energy of 100 social climbers, now felt cavernous and cold. The half-eaten appetizers on the silver trays looked unappetizing, like props on an abandoned movie set. The string quartet had packed up and left without asking for their check, clearly sensing that payment was unlikely. I stood near the window, watching the last of the taillights fade down the driveway. Caleb stood beside me, his presence a warm, solid anchor in the storm. "Well," Caleb said softly, "that cleared the room faster than a fire alarm." I turned to face my family. My father had collapsed into his favorite armchair, the leather groaning under his weight. He looked small. The arrogance that usually puffed out his chest was gone, replaced by a terrified realization. He stared at his hands, his lips moving silently. Doing the math that I had already done for him hours ago. $500,000. He whispered, "Gone." He looked up at the ceiling, as if asking God for a refund. "The house." He choked out, "We put the house up. He said the returns would cover the loan in a month." He looked at me, his eyes wide and glassy. "Harper, the bank, they will take the house." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The math was simple. Without the imaginary returns from Tech Future, they couldn't service the debt on the second mortgage, let alone the first one. Foreclosure wasn't a possibility. It was a mathematical certainty. Suddenly, a sharp movement from the chaise lounge drew my attention. My mother, Beatrice, sat up. The fainting spell was over. Her survival instinct, honed by decades of social maneuvering, had kicked back in. But instead of turning that energy toward solving the problem, she turned it toward the most convenient target, me. She stood up, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. Her face was flushed, her eyes hard and bright with misplaced anger. She marched across the room, stepping over a discarded napkin, and stopped right in front of me. "Are you happy now?" she hissed. I blinked, taken aback by the sheer audacity. "Happy you planned this," she accused, her voice rising to a shriek. "You waited, you knew all along who he was, And you waited until the party started. You waited until everyone was here, until the mayor's wife was here. Mom, I began, but she cut me off. Don't you mom me? You did this on purpose. You wanted to humiliate us. You couldn't stand seeing Savannah happy. You couldn't stand seeing us succeed. So you set up this spectacle. Why didn't you tell us yesterday? Why didn't you tell us this morning? I felt a cold calm settle over me. It was the same calm I felt when I had to fire an executive for embezzlement or testify in a federal hearing. Emotional outbursts were data points, and hers was screaming denial. I warned you 3 times, I said, my voice steady and low. I warned you when I arrived. I continued, ticking the points off on my fingers. I told you his company was a shell. You told me I was jealous. I warned you this morning. I said, I told you about his criminal record. You accused me of blackmailing him for money. I warned you right before the party started. I finished, my voice hardening. I begged you to look at the paperwork. You told me you regretted inviting me. You said you should have forgotten I existed. Beatrice flinched, remembering her own cruel words, but she didn't back down. You could have tried harder, she screamed. You could have forced us to listen instead. You let us sign those checks. You let your father mortgage the house. You watched us ruin ourselves just so you could have your big moment with the projector. You are cruel. Harper, you are a cruel, vindictive girl. Savannah scrambled up from the floor, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. She joined her mother, forming a united front of delusion. She is right, Savannah sobbed. You ruined my life. I could have broken up with him quietly. We could have canceled the party with a medical excuse, but no, you had to call the FBI. You had to make it a raid. Now I am the girl whose fiancé was arrested at her engagement party. My reputation is dead. I looked at them, shaking my head in disbelief. They had just lost their fortune to a con artist I had exposed, and they were angry at me for the production value of the rescue. I didn't call the FBI to embarrass you. I said, I called them because he was leaving the country tonight. If I had waited until tomorrow to be polite, he would be in the Cayman Islands with your money. And you would never have seen justice. At least now, he is in a cell. Justice, my father moaned from the chair. What good is justice? The money is gone. He spent it. You heard him? It is gone. He put his head in his hands. We are destitute. We are going to be on the street. The gravity of the situation finally seemed to penetrate the hysteria. The room fell silent again, save for the sound of my father's labored breathing. The reality of poverty, real poverty, not the we can't afford a new Mercedes this year kind, was settling in. Then, my father lifted his head. He looked at Caleb. His eyes were desperate, searching for a lifeline. But the tragedy was that even in his desperation, his vision was limited by his prejudice. He saw Caleb in the fine suit. He saw the way Caleb had handled Timothy. But he couldn't process what it meant. He still saw the carpenter. He still saw the man he thought was scraping by. Caleb, my father said, his voice trembling. Son-in-law. Caleb looked at him, his expression unreadable. Yes. Richard. I know we haven't been the most welcoming. Richard stammered. And I know you don't have much, but you are a strong man. You work with your hands. I stiffened. I knew where this was going, and it made me want to scream. We need cash flow, Richard continued, his voice dropping to a begging whisper, to pay the interest, to keep the lights on until I can figure this out. Do you think, could you pick up extra shifts? I stared at him. Maybe weekends, Richard pushed. Looking at Caleb's hands, I hear construction pays well for overtime. If you could send us, I don't know, $1,000 a month, it would help. We would be grateful. Truly, Beatrice nodded, wiping her eyes. Yes, we are family. After all, if you could just work a little harder. Caleb, maybe Harper could get a second job too. Waiting tables. Every bit helps. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my throat, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the hysterical laughter of someone watching a man try to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. They were asking a man who had just closed a 9-figure development deal to work overtime at a construction site to pay their electric bill. They were asking the woman who owned the software company that just saved them to wait tables. The blindness was total. It was incurable. I stepped forward, moving between my parents and my husband. "Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a whip. "Stop. Just stop." He looked at me, confused. "What? We are just asking for help. You should want to help your family." "You are asking the wrong questions," I said. "You are asking for pennies when you are standing on a gold mine, and you don't even know it because you are too busy looking down on the miners." I turned to Caleb. He was looking at me, a question in his eyes. "Are we doing this?" I nodded. "Burn it down. He doesn't need to pick up extra shifts." "Dad," I said, "and I don't need to wait tables." Why? Beatrice snapped. "Are you too good to work? Too lazy to help your parents when they are drowning?" "No," I said, "because you still haven't figured it out. You watched the presentation. You saw the data. You saw the company name, Aegis Ghost. So Savannah sniffed. It is a security company. You work there. We get it. You are a mid-level manager or something. Good for you. But that doesn't pay a $500,000 mortgage." I closed my eyes for a second, gathering my patience. "I don't work there." "Savannah," I said softly, "I told you. I founded it." I walked over to the coffee table, where my purse was sitting. I picked it up and pulled out my phone. I walked back to my father and held it up. "You still don't understand who is standing in front of you." "Do you?" I asked. I unlocked the phone. I opened my banking app. The Face ID verified me instantly. The screen loaded. "You think Caleb is a poor carpenter because he wears flannel and builds furniture for fun," I said. "You think I am a failure because I don't wear logo-covered purses and brag about fake IPOs." I tapped the screen, bringing up the summary of my primary checking account. Not the savings, not the investment portfolio, just the cash I kept on hand for liquidity. I turned the screen toward them. "But the truth is," I said, my voice ringing in the silence, "the only poor people in this room are you." I thrust the phone forward, forcing them to look at the number that glowed in bright, uncompromising white digits against the black background. It was time for the final lesson, and this one was going to cost them more than just their pride. "Sit down," I said. It was not a suggestion. It was not a request. It was a command, delivered with the same flat, uncompromising tone I used when terminating a contract with a vendor who had failed to deliver. For a second, my father looked like he was going to argue. His face was still mottled with red patches of stress and humiliation, but then he looked at my eyes. He saw something there he had never seen before, or perhaps he had simply never bothered to look. He saw the absolute absence of fear. He saw the cold, hard bedrock of authority. He sank onto the sofa next to my mother. Beatrice was dabbing her eyes with a cocktail napkin, her mascara ruined. Her posture collapsed. Savannah sat on the floor, hugging her knees, looking like a discarded doll. I walked over to the coffee table. It was a cheap reproduction piece, intended to look like mahogany but actually particle board with a veneer, a perfect metaphor for this house, this family, and the life they had built. I held my phone in my hand. The screen was already unlocked. The banking app was open. I placed the phone in the exact center of the table. "Face up. Look," I said. My father leaned forward, squinting. He reached into his shirt pocket for his reading glasses, his hands shaking so badly it took him 2 tries to put them on. My mother peered over his shoulder. The screen was set to maximum brightness. The numbers were stark white against the dark background of the premium interface. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. Available balance: $10,450,000.00. The silence that descended on the room was different from the silence that had followed the police raid. That silence had been filled with shock and fear. This silence was filled with a vacuum, a sudden, violent displacement of air caused by the shattering of a worldview. I watched their eyes. I watched the way my father's pupils dilated. I watched him blink. Once, twice, 3 times. I saw his lips move as he counted the commas. He was trying to process the magnitude of the integer. He was trying to find a decimal point that would make this number make sense to turn it into 10,000. Or 1,000, but the decimal point was firmly at the end. "Is that?" my father crooned, his voice a dry husk. "Is that a glitch?" I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "It is not a glitch, Dad. It is cash, liquid, available for withdrawal right now." My mother grabbed the phone, her fingers leaving smudges on the glass. She brought it closer to her face, staring at it as if it were a holy relic. $10 million, she whispered. $10 million. She looked up at me, her mouth hanging open. "But how you said you just founded that company? You said I sold 60% of Aegis Ghost to a defense conglomerate 3 years ago." I said, keeping my voice bored, "This is just the dividend payment from the last quarter, plus some retained earnings I haven't bothered to invest yet." I took a step back, crossing my arms over my chest. "I didn't tell you because I didn't think it mattered." I continued, "I thought family was about connection, not net worth, but clearly, I was working with outdated data." My father looked from the phone to me, and then, slowly, his gaze drifted to Caleb, who was standing by the fireplace, one hand in his pocket, looking at the room with a mixture of amusement and pity. "And Caleb?" my father asked, his voice barely audible. I smiled. It was a predator's smile. I walked over to my husband and placed a hand on the shoulder of his Italian suit, the suit they had been too blind to recognize as bespoke. "You remember how you told him he should pick up extra shifts at the construction site?" I asked. "You remember offering him a job as a security guard for $12 an hour?" My father flinched as if I had struck him. "Caleb isn't a carpenter because he has to be. Dad, he is a carpenter because he likes the feel of wood. He likes building things with his hands because his brain spends all day moving billions of dollars around." I gestured to my husband. "Caleb is a silent partner in 3 major urban development firms on the West Coast. That building Timothy was bragging about, the Obsidian Tower, Caleb didn't just buy it. He conceived it. And last week, while you were worrying about the price of shrimp for this party, Caleb closed a deal on a mixed-use zoning project in Seattle." I paused for effect, letting the anticipation build. "He sold his stake for $52 million. I said. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. $52 million. My mother let out a strangled sound, something between a sob and a gasp. She looked at Caleb, the man she had forced to park cars, the man she had mocked, the man she had banned from her Christmas table, and she saw him for the first time. She didn't see a son-in-law. She saw a walking, breathing, ATM machine that she had just insulted for 48 hours straight. $52 million, my father repeated, his voice faint, plus $10 million. Over $60 million, I summarized, standing right here in your living room, and you asked us to pay your electric bill. I walked back to the coffee table and picked up my phone. I slipped it into my clutch, breaking the trance. "Do you remember Christmas?" I asked softly. My mother looked up, her face pale. "Harper, please no. Listen," I said, "you left a voicemail. You said you forgot to invite us. You said Caleb, my husband, the man who could buy and sell Timothy's entire imaginary existence before breakfast would ruin the aesthetic. You said he was too poor. You said we should stay home and save money." I looked around the room, at the cheap decorations, the rented furniture, the fake luxury. We didn't stay home because we were saving money. Mom, we went to Gstaad. We rented a chalet that cost more for a week than you owe on your mortgage. We drank vintage wine and laughed about how desperate you were to impress a fraud. I leaned in close, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. You were ashamed of us, but standing here tonight, looking at you, looking at how easily you were bought, how easily you were tricked, and how quickly you turned on each other, I realized something. I paused. We are the ones who should be ashamed. We are ashamed that we are related to people so shallow that they can't see the difference between a diamond and a piece of glass just because the glass sparkles a little more. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The truth had been laid bare, and it was ugly. Then, The shift happened. It started with my mother. I saw the gears turning behind her wet eyes. I saw the calculation override the humiliation. She was a survivor, a parasite looking for a new host. She let out a fresh sob. But this one sounded different. It was softer, more imploring. She reached out a hand toward me. "Harper," she wailed. "Oh, my baby. My brilliant, brilliant girl." She stood up, ignoring her husband, and stumbled toward me. "I knew," she choked out, deep down. "I always knew you were special. That is why I was so hard on you. Don't you see? I pushed you because I knew you had greatness in you. I wanted you to prove me wrong." I took a step back, avoiding her touch. The revisionist history was nauseating. "You pushed me because you thought I was useless." I said coldly. "No, no." Beatrice insisted, clutching at the air where my arm had been. "I was just being a mother. I wanted the best for you. And look at you. You are a success. You are a tycoon. I am so proud. I am so incredibly proud of you. Harper." She turned to Caleb, wiping her tears and fixing a grotesque, trembling smile on her face. And Caleb. "Oh, Caleb, I am so sorry about the misunderstanding. You know how stress gets to me, but I always said, didn't I say? Richard, I always said there was something noble about you, a quiet strength. I knew you were hiding a light under a bushel, my father." Taking his cue from his wife, stood up as well. He tried to straighten his shoulders, to regain some semblance of paternal dignity, but he just looked like a beggar in a suit. "Harper," he said, his voice shaking, "family is family. We make mistakes. We fight. But when the chips are down, we stick together. That is what Sterlings do." He gestured helplessly around the room. "We are in a bit of a bind here, honey, a tight spot. But now that we know you have the means well, it is a relief, a profound relief. We can fix this. We can pay off the bank. We can sue Timothy. We can start over." He looked at me with expectant eyes, as if the check was already written, as if the abuse of the last 30 years could be erased by a bank transfer. Savannah scrambled up from the floor. She saw the lifeline. She saw a way to salvage her social standing. She rushed over to me, grabbing my hand before I could pull away. Her grip was clammy and desperate. "Harper," she cried, her eyes wide and pleading. "You have to help me. The deposit on the venue was non-refundable. And I put the dress on a credit card. It is $12,000. She squeezed my hand, digging her nails in. "You can pay it off, right? It is nothing to you. It is like buying a coffee for you. You can fix this. Please, Harper, I am your little sister. You can't let me be ruined. We can go shopping tomorrow. We can buy a new wardrobe. We can tell everyone you are the investor behind the scenes." She was already plotting how to use my money to rebuild her image. She wanted to turn me into her personal ATM, her shield against the world she had failed to conquer. I looked down at her hand on mine. I looked at her manicure, perfect and sharp. I looked at my mother's pleading, tear-streaked face. I looked at my father's hopeful, greedy eyes. They hadn't learned a thing. They didn't regret how they treated me. They didn't regret calling my husband a loser. They only regretted that they hadn't known we were the ones with the checkbook. If I wrote them a check right now, they would take it. And tomorrow, they would be back to critiquing my hair and telling Caleb not to sit on the good furniture. They would just do it with full bellies and paid bills. Slowly, deliberately. I peeled Savannah's fingers off my hand. I dropped her hand. It fell to her side like a dead weight. I stepped back, creating a physical chasm between us. I stood next to Caleb, and he wrapped an arm around my waist, a protective, solid barrier against their neediness. "No," I said. The word hung in the air. Simple, final. What Savannah whispered. I said no. I repeated, "I am not going to pay for the dress. I am not going to pay off the mortgage. I am not going to pay the legal fees to sue Timothy." But my mother stammered, "But you have $10 million. You have $60 million. It is nothing to you. It is everything to me," I corrected. Because I earned it, and Caleb earned his. We worked for it while you were taking etiquette lessons and judging people by their shoes. Harper. My father's voice rose, desperation turning back into anger. You can't do this. We are your parents. We gave you life. You owe us. I owe you nothing. I said, my voice hard as diamond. I paid my debt to you tonight. I saved you from a federal indictment. I saved you from being accomplices to a felony. I stopped you from losing the last shirt off your back to a con man. That is my gift. That is your inheritance. I looked at Savannah. You wanted a wedding. Savannah, you wanted a spectacle. Well, you got one. Now you get to deal with the cleanup. I turned to Caleb. Let's go. I said, I am tired of the smell of desperation. We turned our backs on them. Harper, wait, Harper. My mother's screams followed us, shrill and panicked. My father was shouting something about duty. Savannah was wailing on the floor again, but as we walked toward the front door, passing the spot where Timothy had been dragged out, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sad. I felt lighter than air. I opened the heavy front door, and the cool night air of Virginia rushed in, cleansing the stale perfume of the house. We stepped out onto the porch, leaving the chaos, the debt, and the toxic expectations behind us. The checkmate wasn't the money. The checkmate was the realization that I didn't need them to be proud of me. I didn't need them at all. And that was a power that $10 million couldn't buy, but it certainly made the exit a lot more stylish. The hangover from the engagement party lasted exactly 72 hours before the reality of the situation arrived in the form of a certified letter from the First National Bank of Virginia. I was back in Seattle by then, sitting in my office at the Aegis Ghost headquarters, monitoring the fallout from a safe distance. I had not blocked my parents' numbers yet. I needed to keep the line open for this specific moment. When my phone rang at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday, I knew exactly what it was. It was not a social call. It was the sound of a house of cards finally hitting the ground. Harper. My father's voice was unrecognizable. It was jagged, broken, stripped of all the pompous authority he had wielded like a club for 30 years. They are taking the house. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, swiveling slightly to look out at the gray skyline. I asked him to clarify, though I already knew the answer. The bank, he choked out. The foreclosure notice came this morning. Timothy, that bastard, didn't just take the cash. He forged my signature on a lien. He used the house as collateral for a high-risk bridge loan with a predatory lender. The interest rate is 40%. We are in default. They are giving us 30 days to vacate. He started to sob. It was a wet, pathetic sound. Your mother is in the bedroom. She won't come out. She is talking about where we are going to live. We have nowhere. Harper, the retirement accounts are empty. The credit cards are maxed out. We are going to be homeless. I let the silence stretch on the line for a full 10 seconds. I wanted him to feel the weight of it. I wanted him to feel the cold, hard texture of the rock bottom he had hit. Then, I spoke. I can fly down tomorrow, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I will bring my lawyer. You will help. Hope surged into his voice, desperate and pathetic. Oh, thank God. Thank you. Harper, I knew you wouldn't abandon us. I knew family meant something to you. I didn't answer that. I just hung up. I arrived at the estate the next afternoon. I did not bring Caleb this time. This was not a family visit. It was a business transaction, and I needed to handle it with surgical precision. I brought Elias, my corporate attorney, a man who had negotiated hostile takeovers of software firms and who had a heart made of contract law and ice water. The house looked the same from the outside, but inside, it felt like a funeral home. The curtains were drawn. Boxes were half-packed in the hallway, evidence of a panic that had no direction. My parents and Savannah were sitting at the dining room table, the same table where they had mocked my husband's career less than a week ago. They looked up when I walked in. They looked 10 years older. My mother's eyes were swollen. Savannah looked pale and unwashed, wearing sweatpants instead of silk. Harper. My mother breathed, starting to stand up. Sit down. Beatrice, I said, placing my briefcase on the table. I sat at the head of the table, my father's seat. Elias sat to my right, opening his laptop and spreading a series of documents across the polished wood. Here is the situation, I began, skipping the pleasantries. I have reviewed the lien and the foreclosure notice. The debt is real. The bank is within its rights. The house goes to auction in 29 days. My father put his head in his hands. We are finished. However, I continued, I have spoken with the bank's asset management division this morning. They are not interested in the hassle of an auction. They want liquidity. They are willing to sell the debt and the deed to a private buyer for the full outstanding amount plus penalties. I signaled to Elias. He slid a thick document toward my father. I have agreed to be that buyer, I said. My mother let out a cry of relief. Oh, Harper, you are buying the house back for us. I knew it. I told Richard you would save us. I held up a hand. The gesture was sharp enough to cut her celebration short. I am not buying it for you, I corrected her. I am buying it for my portfolio. The room went deadly silent. What Savannah asked, her voice trembling. I am purchasing the property, I explained, keeping my tone as dry as a tax audit. The deed will be transferred to a holding company I control. I will pay off the bank. The foreclosure will be halted. So we get to keep the house, my father asked, confused. You get to live in the house, I said, under specific terms. Elias flipped the document to page 4. This is a residential lease agreement, I said. You will no longer be the owners of this estate. You will be tenants. Tenants, my father sputtered. In my own house. It is not your house. Richard, I said coldly, it is the bank's house, and in about an hour, it will be my house. If you want to stay here, you will sign this lease. I pointed to the paragraph highlighted in yellow. You will pay a monthly rent of $4,500. I stated, that is actually 10% below market value for a property of this size in this zip code. I am giving you a family discount. Rent, my mother shrieked. You are going to charge your own parents' rent, Harper. We have no money. You know we have no money. That is a problem. I admitted, but it is not my problem. You have assets you can liquidate. You have jewelry. You have furniture. You have 2 luxury cars in the driveway that you don't need. Sell them. I looked at Savannah. And you have 3 able-bodied adults in this house. It is time to generate revenue. My father's face turned a deep, furious shade of purple. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the papers. This is outrageous, he shouted. You are rich. We saw the account. You have millions, and you are going to squeeze us for rent. You are going to act like a slumlord to the people who raised you. Where is your heart? Harper. My heart is exactly where you taught it to be. Dad, I replied, not blinking. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him, for 32 years. You taught me a very specific lesson. You taught me that worth is determined by financial success. You taught me that affection is transactional. You taught me that if someone doesn't have money like you thought Caleb didn't, they don't deserve respect. I tapped the lease agreement with my index finger. I am just applying your curriculum. Dad, this is business. You are a distressed asset. I am the investor. I am bailing you out of homelessness. But I'm not running a charity. If I gave you this house for free, you would never learn. You would just find another Timothy to impress. Harper, this is cruel, my mother sobbed. It is a contract, I corrected, and there are other terms. I nodded to Elias, who turned the page. Clause 7, Elias said, his voice smooth and professional. The tenants are responsible for all utilities and groundskeeping. The holding company will not pay for landscapers or maids. Clause 8. He continued, failure to pay rent by the 5th of the month will result in immediate eviction proceedings. There is no grace period. Clause 9. I added, I retain the right to sell the property at any time, with 60 days' notice, should I decide to liquidate the asset. My father stared at the paper as if it were a death warrant. You would evict us if you don't pay. Absolutely. I said, just like the bank would. The only difference is, I'm giving you a chance to stay. The bank was just going to change the locks. Savannah finally spoke up. She looked terrified. But Harper, she whined, how are we supposed to pay $4,000 a month? Dad is retired. Mom hasn't worked since the 80s. And I can't work. I have the wedding debt. I have the lawsuit potential from the vendors. I looked at my sister. The entitlement was still there, but it was cracking. You can work. Savannah, I said, you are 28 years old. You have a degree in communications that you have never used. I pulled a business card from my pocket and slid it across the table toward her. I spoke to Caleb last night. I said, she looked at the card. It had the logo of the Obsidian Tower Management Company. They are looking for a front desk receptionist for the main lobby. I said, it is an entry-level position. Answering phones, logging guests, handling courier packages. It pays $22 an hour, plus benefits. Receptionist Savannah gasped, looking at the card like it was contaminated. You want me to be a receptionist in Caleb's building? It is a job. Savannah, I said, it is honest work. Something this family needs to get acquainted with. People will see me, she protested. Timothy's friends, the social circle, they all go to that building for meetings. They will see me sitting behind a desk. It will be humiliating, I shrugged. Hunger is more humiliating, I said, and so is homelessness. The shift starts at 6 a.m. Caleb put in a good word for you, which is more than you deserve considering you called him a loser to his face. If you want to pay your share of the rent and start paying off your credit card debt, I suggest you take it. She looked at Mom and Dad, waiting for them to save her, to tell me I was being unreasonable, but they just sat there. Defeated, they knew the math, they knew they had zero leverage. My father looked at the lease again. His hands were shaking. You are really doing this, he whispered. You are really going to become our landlord. I uncapped a heavy, expensive fountain pen and placed it on the document. I am saving you from the street. Dad, I said, whether you accept that salvation is up to you, you can sign, or you can start packing the rest of the boxes. The sheriff arrives on Friday to execute the eviction if the debt isn't settled. He looked at the pen. He looked at my mother, who was weeping silently into her hands. He looked around the room, at the crown molding, the chandelier, the symbols of the status he had sacrificed his relationship with me to maintain. He couldn't lose the house. It was the only shell of dignity he had left, even if he didn't own it anymore. He picked up the pen. I hope you're happy. Harper, he spat, his voice full of venom. I hope your money keeps you warm at night. I smiled, a genuine, cold smile. It does, actually. I said, it has excellent insulation properties. He signed. The scratch of the nib against the paper was loud in the quiet room. He shoved the paper toward my mother. She signed, her tears wetting the page. Then Savannah. She picked up the pen as if it weighed 50 pounds. She glared at me with pure hatred. I will never forgive you for this, she hissed, making me work for Caleb. It is sick. See you at 6 a.m. on Monday, I replied cheerfully. Don't be late. The building manager is strict. Elias collected the papers, checking the signatures. He nodded to me. The deal is done. I stood up. I buttoned my blazer. I felt a sense of closure that was cleaner and sharper than any apology they could have offered. I didn't want their love. I didn't want their approval. I wanted their submission to reality. And I had it. I will have the holding company send over the payment portal details. I said, picking up my briefcase. Rent is due on the 1st. I turned to leave. Harper, my mother called out. Her voice was small, fearful. I stopped at the doorway. Yes. Will you come for Easter? She asked. It was pathetic. It was a reflex. She was trying to reset the board, to pretend that we could go back to playing happy family now that the transaction was complete. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had stood by while her husband gambled their future, the woman who had sneered at my husband, the woman who had signed a lease to live in her own house because she was too proud to be poor but too foolish to be rich. I don't think so. Mom, I said. Why not? She asked, tears welling up again. Because, I said, checking my watch, I have a business to run, and tenants are generally discouraged from socializing with the landlord. It complicates the professional relationship. I walked out the door. I walked down the steps, past the overgrown boxwoods that Caleb had trimmed for free, past the spot where Timothy's rented Maserati had been parked. I got into my rental car, a sensible sedan, and started the engine. As I drove away, I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to see the house shrinking in the distance. I knew exactly who was inside, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was. I was not the daughter they forgot to invite. I was the woman who owned the roof over their heads, and that was the only invitation I would ever need again. The gravel of the driveway crunched beneath the tires of our rental sedan, a sound that felt final, like the closing of a heavy book. I watched the sprawling brick facade of my childhood home recede in the side mirror. Usually, leaving this house filled me with a cocktail of guilt and inadequacy, a nagging feeling that I had failed to be the daughter they wanted. But today, as the house shrank to the size of a dollhouse and then vanished behind the line of overgrown oak trees, I felt something entirely different. I felt weightless. It was a physical sensation, as if gravity had loosened its grip on my chest. The tight knot of anxiety that had lived in my solar plexus for 3 decades simply unraveled. I looked over at Caleb. He was driving with one hand on the wheel, his other hand resting relaxed on his thigh. He caught me looking and offered a small, easy smile. "We did it," he said softly. "We didn't just survive them," I replied, leaning my head back against the headrest. "We outgrew them." The drive to Dulles Airport was quiet, but it was a companionable silence. For the first time, I wasn't replaying conversations in my head, wondering if I had said the wrong thing or if my mother was angry with me. I didn't care if she was angry. Her anger was no longer my currency. I had rewritten the economy of our relationship, and in this new market, her disapproval had zero value. We were merging onto the highway, the gray tarmac stretching out toward a horizon that didn't include emotional blackmail. When my phone buzzed in my purse, it was a sharp, intrusive sound that cut through the peace. I pulled it out. The screen lit up with a notification. It was a text message from Beatrice. My thumb hovered over the screen. Part of me, the old Harper, the conditioned Harper, wanted to panic. Was Dad having a heart attack? Had Savannah done something drastic? But the new Harper, the one who had just negotiated a hostile takeover of her own family dynamics, knew better. I unlocked the phone and read the message. "Harper, the compressor on the Sub-Zero refrigerator is making a terrible noise. The repairman says it will be $800 to fix. Since you are the landlord now, you need to send the money. Venmo is fine. Dad says hurry before the food spoils." I stared at the words. I read them twice. A laugh bubbled up in my throat. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't angry. It was genuinely incredulous. Less than an hour ago, I had saved them from homelessness. I had exposed a felon who was stealing their life savings. I had watched them sign a lease to live in a house they no longer owned, and their immediate reaction, before the ink was even dry, was to demand $800 for a refrigerator repair via text message. They hadn't learned humility. They had just shifted their entitlement to a new target. They thought that because I was the landlord, I was now their servant. They thought the lease was just a piece of paper, and that the dynamic of me serving them would continue, just with a different bank account footing the bill. "Who is it?" Caleb asked, glancing at the phone. "It is Mom." I said, "She wants money to fix the fridge." Caleb shook his head, keeping his eyes on the road. "Of course she does." I looked at the message one last time. I thought about replying. I thought about explaining that under the lease terms they had signed, appliances were the responsibility of the tenant. I thought about engaging in the argument, explaining the logic, fighting for my boundaries, but then I realized that explaining was a form of engagement, and engagement was what they wanted. They wanted the friction. They wanted the drama. I didn't want to win the argument. I wanted to leave the debate hall. I tapped the top of the screen where my mother's name was displayed. I scrolled down to the bottom of the contact card. My finger hovered over the red text. "Block this caller." I pressed it. A confirmation box popped up. You will not receive phone calls, messages, or FaceTime from this person. I pressed block contact. Then I went to my father's contact. Block contact. Then Savannah. Block contact. I put the phone down on the center console. The screen went black. What did you tell her? Caleb asked. Nothing, I said, looking out the window at the passing Virginia countryside. I didn't say a word. I picked up the phone one last time and opened my email app. I composed a new message to Elias, my attorney. Subject management of Sterling Estate asset. Elias, effective immediately. All communication regarding the property and the tenants must go through your office or the property management firm. I am blocking direct contact with the tenants. Do not forward me their personal messages unless it is a legal summons or a notice of vacancy. If they have maintenance issues, direct them to the clause in their lease regarding tenant responsibilities. If they fail to pay, initiate eviction. I do not need to be consulted. Just execute the contract. I hit send. It was done. The cord was cut. I wasn't just leaving physically. I was severing the digital umbilical cord that had allowed them to feed on my energy for years. 6 months later, the air smelled different. It didn't smell of old dust and desperate perfume. It smelled of crisp pine needles, wet earth, and wood smoke. I stood on the deck of the cabin, a mug of steaming coffee in my hands, looking out over the glassy surface of Flathead Lake in Montana. The water was a deep, mesmerizing blue, reflecting the jagged peaks of the Mission Mountains that rose up in the distance like sentinels guarding our peace. This house was nothing like the estate in Virginia. There were no columns, no marble floors, no crystal chandeliers. It was built from hand-hewn cedar logs, each one fitted into place by Caleb's own hands. He had spent the last 4 months building it, taking a sabbatical from the boardroom to return to the work that grounded him. It was solid. It was real. It was a home, not a stage set. The sliding glass door behind me opened, and Caleb stepped out. He was wearing a thick wool sweater and jeans, his feet bare on the wooden deck. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Happy Thanksgiving," he murmured. "Happy Thanksgiving," I replied, leaning back into his warmth. Inside, the cabin was alive with noise, but it wasn't the polite, strained murmurs of social climbers trying to outdo each other. It was genuine, raucous laughter. We had invited 6 people, not business partners, not VIPs, just friends. There was Marcus Thorne, the billionaire CEO who had helped us expose Timothy, wearing a goofy apron and trying to carve the turkey while arguing about football with Sarah. My old college roommate who worked as a librarian. There was the project manager from Caleb's construction crew and his wife. There was my assistant from Aegis Ghost, who had flown in with her fiancé. There was no dress code. There was no seating chart. The china was mismatched because we liked it that way. The wine was excellent, but nobody was checking the label to see how much it cost. It was the first holiday in my life where I didn't feel a knot of dread in my stomach. A courier van had come up the long dirt driveway earlier that morning, delivering the weekly mail bundle forwarded from my office in Seattle. I had tossed it on the side table, intending to ignore it until Monday, but one envelope had caught my eye. It was from the property management firm in Virginia. I walked back inside, leaving the crisp air for the warmth of the great room. A fire was roaring in the stone hearth, casting a golden glow over the friends gathered around the kitchen island. I picked up the envelope. It was marked Quarterly Asset Report, Sterling Estate. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to throw it directly into the fire without opening it, but the analyst in me, the part that dealt in facts and figures, needed to know. I slid a finger under the flap and tore it open. The report was brief, just a single page of bullet points and a ledger summary. Tenant status current, rent payments for September, October, and November were received on time. Notes: Tenant 1 Savannah Sterling is currently employed at Obsidian Tower Management. Attendance record is perfect. Shift supervisor reports she has requested overtime hours on weekends. Tenant 2 Richard Sterling has liquidated 2 vehicles and a collection of vintage firearms. Proceeds were applied to the rent advance. Tenant 3 Beatrice Sterling has been observed managing a small garden in the rear of the property. Local markets indicate she has been selling cut flowers on weekends. I read the lines again. Savannah was working overtime. My father had sold his toys. My mother was selling flowers at a market. They were working. For the first time in their lives, they were actually generating value instead of just consuming it. They were scraping by. They were struggling. But they were doing it. The lease, the cruel contract I had forced them to sign, had done what 30 years of coddling never could. It had forced them to grow up. They were finally learning that the roof over their head wasn't a birthright. It was something you earned every single day. I felt a strange sense of pride. Not the warm, fuzzy pride of a daughter, but the cold, satisfied pride of a teacher who sees a difficult student finally pass a test. I didn't feel the urge to call them. I didn't feel the need to tell them good job. That would just reset the dynamic. They needed to do this for themselves, not for my approval. My silence was the best gift I could give them. It was the vacuum that forced them to stand on their own 2 feet. "Hey," Harper Sarah called out from the kitchen, waving a ladle. "Are you going to help with the gravy or just stare at your mail?" I looked up. The room was filled with smiling faces, people who loved me for Harper, not for the landlord or the banker. I looked at the paper one last time. Then I walked over to the fireplace. I didn't need to keep this report. I didn't need the proof. I knew who I was, and I knew where I stood. I tossed the letter into the flames. The paper curled instantly, turning brown, then black. The fire caught the edge, and for a second, the words "Sterling Estate" glowed bright orange before crumbling into ash. The draft pulled the smoke up the chimney and out into the vast, open Montana sky. "I am coming," I said, turning my back on the fire. I joined my friends. I took the ladle from Sarah. I kissed Caleb on the cheek. We sat down to a dinner that was loud, messy, and absolutely perfect. Later that evening, after the guests had retired to the guest cabins or driven back to town, Caleb and I went back out onto the porch. The sun had set, and the sky was a canvas of 1,000,000,000 stars, clearer and brighter than anything I had ever seen in the city. The air was freezing. But Caleb had wrapped a heavy quilt around us. We stood by the railing, listening to the gentle lap of the water against the dock. "Do you miss them?" Caleb asked quietly. The question hung in the cold air. I thought about it. I thought about the mother who criticized my clothes, the father who sold my husband out for a fake investment, the sister who called me toxic. I miss the idea of them, I said honestly. I miss the parents I wanted them to be, but I don't miss the people they are. I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling the solid beat of his heart through the wool of his sweater. I realized something today. I whispered, "What is that?" They spent their whole lives trying to get into exclusive clubs, trying to get into the VIP section, trying to get invited to the right parties. I looked out at the dark silhouette of the mountains, at the vast, wild freedom that surrounded us, and in the end, I said, I built a world that is more exclusive than anything they could ever imagine, not because it costs money to get in, but because the price of admission is kindness and honesty, and they just can't afford the ticket. Caleb tightened his arm around me. "No," he agreed. "They can't." I looked up at him, "And I don't need them to invite me in anymore," I said, a final smile touching my lips, "because I am already home." We stood there for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead. Two people who had walked through the fire and come out the other side. Not just with their fortune intact, but with their souls reclaimed. The silence of the lake was not empty. It was full. It was the sound of a life that finally, truly, belonged to me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed Harper's journey from being the overlooked daughter to the woman who took control of her own destiny. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a busy city like Seattle, a quiet cabin in the woods, or somewhere halfway across the world? Please leave a comment below and let me know. If you enjoyed this story of justice and resilience, Please make sure to subscribe to the Blue Payback channel so you never miss a new episode. Hit that like button to support the channel. And if you really loved it, smash that hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who need a little satisfaction in their day. See you in the next story.